My husband saw a video of me making out with my boss. He showed no mercy to me after.
This with my boss at a party and didn't notice my coworker videotaping me. Have you ever been in a situation where you were videotaped by a coworker at a party before? Well, I was. It's a scenario I want to erase from my memory. The aftermath of that has cost me my marriage, career, and all the things I have worked for over the years. I regret it and take accountability for everything. I wish I could turn back the hands of time to right all the wrongs and also erase that memory. But I guess it's not possible. My husband has cut all ties with me and sworn never to set his eyes on me again. He doesn't deserve it. The way I cheated on him is something that no man in his right senses would forgive his wife for. His revenge was brutal and he showed no mercy. I guessed I deserved every bit of it. I have learnt my lessons. My name is Linda and I am 25 years old. The name of my ex-husband is Leonard and he is 28 years old. My husband and I have been together for 6 years, but recently we went our separate ways. We both had a son together. His name is Emmy. He is 4 years old. I feel ashamed right now and can't even go out like I used to do because I did the unspeakable. To think that I have a 4-year-old kid that looks up to me and still disgraced myself is something I can't forgive myself for. Apparently, my husband, Ray, watched a video of me cheating on him with my boss at our annual get-together organized by my boss. I didn't know what I was thinking. I had so much to drink and eventually got lost with him and made out with him. Maybe I shouldn't have drank too much or even agreed to go to the party in the first place. I should have just declined, right? But then it was an armless get-together that people go to. It was organized for all the staff to marry after a long day at work. I think I over-enjoyed myself and got so carried away that I forgot that I was married. Did I drink too much that day? Yes, I did. In fact, more than anyone else in the hall. I didn't want my husband to know about my infidelity in the manner he did. I could have let him know about it eventually. Not on the phone. At least, not through a video. Leonard looked at me in utmost disgust and shook his head in disbelief when he saw the video. So, guys, my boss and I were very close to each other. We often hung out together outside work, but it was based on mutual friendship. We never had the intention of going extra with the friendship. Well, at least to my own end, it was like that. I didn't know what my boss's intentions were. My boss's name is Raymond. He is 29 years old. I have been working with my boss for 3 years now. Raymond is the CEO of the company I worked at. It is a shareholding company. There were several occasions where Raymond stole glances at me. He is the playboy type that likes having fun and never takes things seriously. After work, Raymond offered to take me out for dinner, and sometimes we had breakfast and lunch together. I wasn't expecting anything from the dates and the times we hung out together. We were both adults, and I set the boundaries between us. Raymond was also aware of my marital status, but he kept on leading me on. I don't blame him for that night because it was a temptation I should have resisted, but I gave into it. I woke up one morning as usual, ready to go to work. I got up from bed and made breakfast for Emmy and my husband Ray. We had breakfast together and left the house. The school bus came and picked Emmy. He was at elementary school at that time. My husband also left for his workplace, and so I did. I got to work and found a note on my desk. At first, I didn't pay attention to it because we had a meeting that all the staff had to attend. And so I dropped my bag and went straight to the boardroom. The meeting lasted till noon, and all staff went back to their respective offices. I got to my office and saw the piece of note. At that time, I got curious to know the content of it, and also know who had sent it. I opened it and saw what was written down. After reading through it, I already knew who it was. Of course, it was from Raymond. He was asking if we could go see a movie together. Then I remembered why he kept looking at me during the meeting. I read it and quickly tore the piece of paper and threw it in the waste bin that was close to me. I didn't want to be seen going out with Raymond because I didn't want the other staff to make side comments, and so I was careful. I got up and went to meet Raymond and told him I wasn't sure if I would go out with him at that time because I didn't want my husband to suspect or misunderstood our friendship. And so I told Raymond I wasn't going. He was persistent and said he just wanted to hang out with me and nothing else. At that time, I didn't understand why he liked hanging with me. I tried making up excuses, but he was persistent and told me he would be waiting for me. Raymond sent me the address before we closed from work that day. I went home and thought about how to sneak out of the house. I didn't know what to tell Ray, my husband. Of course, I couldn't say my boss wanted to see a movie with me then. Leonard would think there was more to it than just hanging out. I got home and was uneasy. I cracked my head to see if I could come up with a better idea of what to say to him. Then the thought of calling Rita, one of my colleagues, came to my mind. Rita and I got to know ourselves through work. We started off as co-workers and eventually got close together. I called Rita and told her about it, and she offered to help me come up with a plan. The plan was for her to come over to my place and did like we wanted to go to a book club. I waited for Rita for a few hours before she showed up at my house. Our plan worked, and so I went out with Raymond. Rita was the only one that knew about it, and she promised not to let anyone know. I snuck out of the house and went to see a movie with my boss, Raymond. When I got there, Raymond complimented my dressing and reminded me how beautiful I was then. I felt a little bit awkward and at the same time loved all the praises he showered on me. The night went fine and we had a great time. The movie lasted for 2 hours. Raymond and I got outside and I told him I needed to leave immediately because it was already late at that time. But he insisted I stay a little longer and have ice cream, which we did. The night was pleasant and I felt happy. At that moment, I wished Leonard could have me treated like the way Raymond did. My husband and I were so busy with work that we hardly had time for each other. But we still made out time for our son. So guys, Raymond got us ice cream and we had it together. After a few minutes later, I told him I needed to go, and at that time, I made up my mind to leave even if he had insisted. Well, he didn't, but told me he would let me go if only I had kissed him. Of course, I refused bluntly and told him I wasn't going to do it. Raymond had an expression of shock and confusion on his face. I got hold of myself, and then I got into my car and drove off. I got home that night and met my husband and son already in bed. I quickly freshened up and went and joined Leonard on the bed. Honestly, guys, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had mixed feelings about the night. I was happy that I had fun and at the same time thought about what Raymond said. At that time, I didn't want to have any type of relationship aside from work with Raymond, but he kept coming closer. After a few hours, I finally fell asleep and retired for the night. The next day, I woke up from bed and did my morning routine before going to work as usual. I couldn't get over the previous night. I kept thinking about it for some reason. I was so deep in my thoughts that I didn't notice when Leonard was talking to him. I got myself back when he tapped on my shoulder twice. I came back to myself and asked him what he was saying. Leonard looked at me and asked if everything was okay. At that point, I didn't know what and started stuttering. Eventually, I managed and told him that I was carried away with something and apologized. He shook his head and repeated what he was saying. Apparently, Leonard wanted to know how my book club went the previous night, because he had fallen asleep when I arrived. I couldn't look at him before I responded because I never went to any book club. I lied. Leonard nodded and didn't suspect anything. He sat down and ate his breakfast, and after a few minutes, he left for work with our son, Emmy. The school bus broke down that day, and Leonard had to take him to school. As soon as they left, I got dressed and headed out to work. I was nervous and at the same time scared, because I thought maybe my boss would be upset after turning him down the previous night. At that point, I planned on avoiding Raymond throughout that day. I got to my office and I saw a bunch of flowers waiting for me on my desk. I looked at the card and discovered it was from Raymond. My mind skipped a bit, but then, for a weird reason, it brightened my day. Not long after, I received a call from Raymond. He called to know if I had received the flowers he had sent. Apparently, he hadn't gotten to work at that time. He was caught up with something that he needed to stay back. I thanked him and told him that I liked. We talked for a while and he made me laugh throughout our conversation. I had to end the call because I was getting another call from my husband. I spoke to my husband not feeling guilty because I thought what was going on between me and Raymond was not that important, and there was no need for me to worry him over it. I got off the phone with my husband and did all the work that was on my table. The flowers were beautiful. I was very happy at that time because no one had given me flowers in such a long time. I also called Rita and told her about everything that had happened the previous night. She teased me about it and made funny jokes throughout our conversation. We talked for a few minutes before we were called for an emergency meeting that day. We got to the boardroom and everyone was seated to hear why the meeting was called. All the staff were present except the boss, Raymond. Everyone had started whispering why he summoned us. We waited for a while before he joined us. Raymond walked in looking all handsome. I watched him walking smartly till he sat down. He was very good looking and at the same time knew how to treat a woman with love. Before anyone would notice my absenteeism, I quickly recomposed myself. Apparently, Raymond called all his staff to have a nice hangout together. It was an annual get-together that is usually organized every year, and all staff were expected to be in attendance. It was more like an end-of-the-year party, but was usually celebrated 2 months before Christmas. All the staff were excited because they were going to have fun. I was also excited and looked forward to it. The get-together was to happen during the weekend. The meeting came to an end, and we all returned back to work that day. Those that were in the planning committee were assigned to organize the events and also put the necessary things together. It was an all-white party, and all the staff were expected to be on white. White is one of Raymond's favorite colors, and we always dressed in white anytime we had any small gatherings. Raymond gave all of us the day off that day so we could have time to prepare for the day party. We only had 1 day to the event, and so we needed time to put things together. I got home that day feeling tired and exhausted. George. Even though we didn't spend much time at work, it was exhausting for me. I got home that day, rested a bit, and headed to make lunch for my husband and Emmy. After I was done, I had my meal and went upstairs to have a quick nap. A few hours later, I was woken up by Emmy's noise. Anytime he sees my car parked outside, he knows that I'm around. He climbed upstairs to meet me. I never joked with my son. He was my bundle of joy and always knew how to make me happy anytime I'm sad. I met Emmy and played a little before I had him changed into his housewares. I fed him his lunch and he slept off afterwards. Soon after, my husband came back from work. Just like any other day, he was looking so tired. He sure did have a long day at work that day. He came down after a few minutes and had his lunch. When it was evening time, we played some games with Emmy and also had dinner together. A couple of minutes later, we went to bed and rested for that day. 2 days later, it was the day of the party. I woke up that morning and told my husband about the party. He wasn't surprised because he knew it was an annual get-together my company always organized. And so he gave me the go-ahead. After we talked that morning, he told me he was going to hang out with his friend Matthew and also took Emmy along. As soon as they left, I made arrangements for what to wear, the type of bag and shoe that would match the white dress to the event. After a while, I finally came to a conclusion on what to wear. After that, I went downstairs, did some cleaning and washing, and also made something for my husband and Emmy to eat when they got back. During that period, I called Rita so we could go together. She agreed and came down. The party was scheduled to start by 8 p.m. and end at 11 p.m. Rita eventually got to my house at exactly 7:30 p.m. I got out of the house and we drove to the venue. We got out of the car and headed to the entrance. The decorations from outside were elegant, and not just outside, but inside as well decorated. I commended those that did it. They really outdid themselves. On getting inside, I saw my boss, Raymond, and one of the staff conversing at a corner of the hall. Immediately he saw us. He walked towards our side. We said hi to him, and Rita asked to be excused. Raymond and I talked about a few things and also flirted with me. At exactly 8 p.m., Raymond called the attention of everyone in the hall. He talked about a few things and asked us to make a toast for ourselves. Everyone clicked glasses and we had wine. So guys, the party was moving slowly and the atmosphere was nice. I had a lot to drink and also ate a few snacks. Soon after, the music was on and we all danced together. I had a few dances with my colleagues and also with Raymond. Indeed, I had a great time. Just when Raymond and I were dancing, I asked him to come over to a corner because I wanted to show something to him. He got curious and then followed me. At that point, I didn't know what I was thinking about. I can't say I was intoxicated, but I knew what I was doing. Raymond followed me, and just when I could say anything, he grabbed me and kissed me. Yes, guys, he did. We were in that state for like 30 minutes before I pulled out and left his place. At that time, I gained my senses and went home before the party was over. I couldn't wait nor looked for her. I immediately called a cab and went home. Raymond kept calling and texting me on my way home, but I refused to pick nor returned any of those messages. I got home and freshened up and went straight to bed. 2 days later, I decided not to go to work because I didn't want to face Raymond after what had happened between us. I tried reaching out to Rita, but it was going. After trying it for some time, I stopped trying. I was worried and thought about what happened to her lines. It was a Monday morning, and of course, Raymond and Emmy had left home. I was the only one left at home that day. Later that afternoon, my husband came back from work looking so angry and upset. I didn't know what was wrong with him at that time. I was so shocked because I had never seen him that angry before ever since we knew each other, or since when we got married. Before I could understand what was going on, I felt a heavy sound across my face. Leonard gave me a hard slap. I didn't know when hot tears were running down my eyes. At that moment, I managed to ask why he slapped me, and then, guys, Leonard brought out his phone and showed me a video. I looked at it and saw that the video was me and Raymond making out at a corner of the hall. I was surprised and shocked at the same time. I didn't know what to do or tell Leonard. My husband shouted at me and even punched the wall. Leonard punched it in such a way that it left a hole on the wall. I got so scared and ran away from his side. Leonard was very upset and angry. To think that it was my boss that I cheated on him with, Leonard was very angry. My husband pushed me out of the house that day and told me never to come back to his house. Leonard also threw my things out and had the gatekeeper thrown me out of the compound. At that moment, I didn't have anywhere to go. I was stranded and helpless. I couldn't go to my parents because they lived far away from the city my husband and I were in. I called Raymond and explained everything to him, but he said he was upset with me for not picking up his calls and also drew a conclusion to fire me for not deciding to take a day off, even when work had resumed. He blocked my lines and also sent me the sack letter. Everything I had worked for was crashing right in front of me. I cried bitterly for days. Raymond had cut all ties with me and Leonard had sent out from his house. I thought of who I could go stay with for a while. Just then I remembered an old-time schoolmate and headed to her house. Her name is Joy. Update. So guys, I stayed with Joy for some time before I finally moved. I didn't want to cause any inconveniences for her. My husband filed for a divorce immediately and had it sent to me a few weeks ago. I took time to reminisce on all that had happened in the past few weeks before signing the divorce papers. Leonard has also filed for a restraining order and kept Emmy away from me. But one thing I can't take is for Emmy to address someone else as mom. No, I won't take it and will never allow it. I'm going to fight for the custody of my son with every penny, even if I will go broke after that. After thorough investigations, I got to know the person that videotaped the scene. It happened to be one of my colleagues at work. I was so shocked and surprised and couldn't believe it. Guess who, guys? It was Rita. Yes, guys, Rita was the one that videotaped me at the party. Apparently, I called this person a friend. Well, I thought we were. I never thought she could do such a thing to me. I got to know about it a few days after my husband divorced me. When I got to know that she was the one behind it, I paid her a visit. At first, she wanted to deny it, but then later admitted when she knew I didn't come to play. Rita was shocked that I could get so upset like I did. She apologized for doing what she did and said it was a big mistake. Of course, I didn't buy the cock and bull story, and I sure gave her an angry piece of my mind. Apparently, Rita had always been daydreaming about Ray. She admired him in any opportunity she got. I thought maybe it was a joke, but never knew she had him in mind. I was foolish enough to fall right into her trap. I also got to know a few days ago that Leonard and Rita are now dating and soon to be a couple. I don't think I would be able to get this off my mind. I practically used my hands to destroy all the things I have worked for. And on top of that, a lady whom I called my friend was going to take over everything. I never thought someone who claimed to be my friend could betray me like that. To even think that she helped snuck out of the house on several occasions was something I can't really comprehend. I was indeed foolish to fall for it. Karma got me hard on these guys. I reported Rita, and after much investigation, all evidence pointed that she was guilty, and so Raymond fired her. At least let her face the consequences of her actions. Let her feel the heat of looking for a job for some time. Leonard can have Rita and marry her, but Rita can never have my child. I regret everything and I'm ready to face whatever revenge, but not with my son. I have learnt my lessons, and I guessed I have learnt it the hard way. Hi, Redditors. I'm about to take you on a journey of the situation I got myself in. The craziest thing happened to me, and it happened so fast. I'm so confused on what part of the story to start from because I can't think of the beginning. My brother, I'll call him Vic, who is a year older, never liked my husband. He never told me why, but he didn't like him, but he made it clear to me and the whole family. My name is Jasmine, and I am 27 years old. I am a soon-to-be divorcee, and it's all my brother's fault. When I was still 18, my parents had just taken the bold step of moving out of our old neighborhood because my dad got a better job offer. It wasn't easy, especially for Vic and I, because we were already in high school. And the thought of leaving our whole life behind was just absurd. A few days into our new school, Vic and I already dreaded it there because it was nothing like our old one. The bullying was a lot more, and to top it all off, it was miles away from home. It became a daily routine to go to school, get bullied, and go back home. That was the story until I met him. He introduced himself as Mark. He was charming, tall, smart, and something about Mark just made me feel safe. Whenever I was with him, I never got picked on. I wasn't the most attractive girl, so I wondered why he chose to talk to me. Whenever I asked, he said it was because I looked like I needed someone to talk to, and he was right. The connection was almost instant, and everything just felt a lot easier for me with Mark in the picture. When my brother noticed I was always with Mark, he warned me to stay away from him, but by then it was too late because I'd fallen head over heels for him. Mark and Vic were in the same grade, so I knew my brother must have had his reasons for the constant warning, but he never told me about them. Mark had already met my parents on one of the days he dropped me off from school, and they approved of a relationship with him. We started dating, but nothing seemed to change my brother's mind about Mark. 2 years had passed after that. I was 20 years and already done with high school. I finished late because I was held back due to the whole moving to a new neighborhood my parents did then. Mark engaged to me after, and I was so happy. He was a college student at a local college then. I never planned on going to college, and he knew that already. When everyone heard the news, the excitement filled the atmosphere. I felt the happiness from everyone except my brother, though he did try to put on a happy face for me. Within the next year, Mark and I got married with the help of everyone. It was a small wedding, and at the end of that day, my life with Mark officially began. Things weren't easy at the time, and I understood. He was in his finals and still took on a part-time job to be able to provide for us. It was a lot of work to do because I also worked retail, so I'd be able to help. Those days were slow, but we were thankful we had each other. Mark and I decided to postpone having kids until we were able to achieve a level of financial stability, and also preferably at a period where we would both be physically present for our kids. We continued living this way till another year passed until he was done with college, and this was a major milestone in our lives, as everything was about to change. I was 22 at that time. When Mark finished college, things didn't immediately become all right, so we both continued our various jobs. I really didn't mind that we did not have it all together yet, because at least I had my husband back to myself. I didn't know things were going to change in 3 years. We were living our normal life until one day when Mark suddenly got a call about a job opening with a salary proposal that would change our lives, but yet again, the job required us moving away and leaving everything behind. Of course, I was skeptical. We had a huge argument about it, and Mark assured me everything was going to be fine because we would be together. Eventually, we moved, and things took a downturn from then on. He was always working and never came home. Sure, I understood the fact that he had to work, and I was okay with that, but I wanted my husband back. For the first 2 years after the move, we tried to make things work. Sometimes he would come home for the weekend and he'd bring all sorts of gifts, and we'd hang out and have date nights. But even on our date nights, it was one call after another. I felt so lonely again, and I didn't know how to handle it. I tried talking to him about it, but he was too busy with one thing or the other. And eventually, when we did, he told me that it wouldn't be permanent, and it was just until he could get enough to get independent and start out his own business. He said by then, we'd have all the time we need. I mean, I was just 25 at this point, and I already felt like I was losing my husband. I knew that I was just an average-looking woman. I had no really special features, while Mark, on the other hand, was a real package. I couldn't help but start to feel insecure at this point. I kept thinking, maybe he has found someone else. And maybe he doesn't really work all those hours and was really just seeing someone else. At this point of our marriage, we talked about having a baby on one of our date nights, and we tried, well, kind of. I mean, he was either too tired or too busy at this point, and that only made me feel more insecure. To no surprise, after a short while, we couldn't be bothered to keep trying. I always knew we both wanted kids and a family, so I didn't know how to deal with this, and I just wanted someone to talk to. I called Mark and let him know that I would be going back home for a while, and so I did. It felt good to see my parents again after about a year, and I let my mom know what was going on. She advised me to be patient and bear with it since it wasn't going to be forever. My mom was really fond of Mark at this time, so it felt like she was never going to take my side anyway. So I told my dad. My dad couldn't help much, obviously because he related more to Mark than myself, and that only broke my heart more. And so I turned to the one person who I probably shouldn't have. I turned to my brother. He was the only person who took my side, and I think that was all I wanted at that point. My brother and I talked a lot about what the last few years had been like. Vic called every now and then after Mark and I got married, but I could tell he was different. He never really wanted me to get married to Mark anyways, and it made sense that he'd change after I did. I couldn't understand why he had a problem with Mark since high school, but he never talked to him about it. Anyways, I just wanted him to be on my side. It might sound desperate, I know, but it made me feel a bit better. Vic told me he was sure Mark was out cheating, and I'd be lucky if he didn't already get someone else pregnant, and I just let myself accept it. Thinking back now, I should have probably said something because maybe if I had said something, it would have changed things, just maybe. I went back home to the city after a few days, feeling just slightly better after my visit, and I had my brother to thank for that. In the coming weeks, my brother and I would talk more and more frequently until it almost felt like every day we talked. When this was happening, my relationship with Mark hadn't become better. In fact, it felt like he had become more distant. Ever since Vic and I started talking frequently, I found myself antagonizing my husband instead of supporting him and being his safe space. I was failing to realize this also wasn't easy on him. I knew he loved me very much, but I couldn't just feel it. In the months that followed, I started traveling home more often, sometimes twice a month, and all because I wanted to talk to Vic. My dad asked me about what Vic and I were talking about, and I told him that we were just bonding after many years. My dad knew fully well that Vic wasn't a fan of Mark and was probably trying to protect my marriage from Vic, but I couldn't come to terms with it at that moment. Mark, on the other hand, definitely knew I was talking to Vic more often. He asked me too, but I just shrugged it off as nothing. Every time we talked, he probably noticed that I was getting more distant. We didn't talk much, but I was sure he could feel I was beginning to drift away from him in the past few days. I could tell because he was beginning to put in far more effort than in the last. He took days off, and we started trying to have a baby again. I felt a little better, and it began to feel like I was getting attention just because he noticed he was losing me. I felt like I could pull it off if I stayed away, but not too far away. I don't know if you understand. Just maybe I could get my husband back if he was scared of losing me. This thought would turn out to be one of the ending factors of my marriage. When I turned 27, I had already made it a habit of listening to my brother over my husband. My brother had become protective and imposing, and the things he said affected my marriage more than it probably should have. I knew this, but I was too far gone, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't even know if I wanted it to stop. I'd been married for almost 7 years, yet here I was childless and feeling a bit lost. I'd been a faithful stay-at-home wife for my rich husband, and though he worked less, I couldn't still really see him until Fridays. I knew his schedule offhand at this point. He'd leave for work on Monday mornings, stay at work till Wednesdays, and surprise me by coming home and then work till Fridays before coming home. It was an improvement, but spending 2 to 3 days in that large house alone wasn't just cutting it anymore. I went back to my parents' place sometimes, but definitely not as frequently as I used to. I didn't know the next time I would travel home, a series of events that would lead to the end of my marriage would occur, and all this would be caused by my own brother. I remember it as if it was yesterday. I called Mark and I told him he could work all week because I would be traveling to see my parents and Vic. Mark said he was okay with that. Now looking back, I wish he stopped me, but I guess wishes don't come true. I took my car keys and made the 10-hour drive to my parents' house. As usual, I got home after dark. I greeted them and went up the stairs to my room. I remember that my brother had asked me to come with some cute clothes because he wanted us to hang out together. I knew it was odd because I have never had to dress up to hang out with my brother, but I guessed since it's been a few months since I was home last. I thought it was because he really missed me and we were going to do something different. And I didn't let that bother me because I was completely exhausted from the drive and just wanted to rest my head. Before I knew what was happening, I slept off only to open my eyes the next morning. I had gotten a few messages from Mark asking if I was okay and if I had gotten to my parents' place safely. I replied immediately and told him I'd be home by the weekend and I'd love to see him. He replied that he'd see what he could do. Vic had already scheduled a meetup with me by 7 p.m. on the coming Thursday at a restaurant where we had met up a few times. I spent my time baking with my mom and running a few errands for my dad. Thursday came faster than I anticipated. By 6 p.m., I started to prepare and I wore my dress and put on very light makeup. I expected Vic and I to be going somewhere else after we left the restaurant because there was no way he'd ask me to come with a dress to a restaurant we usually went to, so I played along. I made the drive down and got there by 7:30 p.m. I was always late. I'm never the first person to get anywhere, and my brother knew me for that already. I walked into the store anxiously looking to spot Vic, and there he was in an isolated corner as I sat beside him and he asked for my car keys. I gave them to him feeling a bit suspicious because I knew he had his own car, but he said we were taking mine and he wanted to drive. I nagged him that we should go, but then he said he was going to go get something real quick at the counter, and that was when he walked out the door and I saw my car drive off through the window. I was still thinking this was some kind of joke or prank until someone walked up to the table where I was and sat down. It was Dave. Dave was a longtime friend of my brother. He was the first friend my brother made when we moved here, and I hate to admit this, but I'd always had a crush on him and my brother knew this. I was surprised to see him. Dave sat down and explained that he got a call from Vic to meet here and asked me what had happened, and it was then it hit me. My own brother had just set up a blind date between his sister and friend. I sat nervously in the restaurant, staring at the man sitting across from me. I had no idea what to say to him. After all, this date had been arranged by my brother, who had never approved of my husband. I felt guilty and nervous, but I also felt a strange sense of excitement. Dave had never spoken to me, not once, despite being my brother's friend for so long. He had always been handsome, and now he looked even better. I sat nervously across from Dave at the restaurant, and I didn't know what to say because my heart was racing. Dave smiled at me and said it was nice to talk to me because it had been long. I felt a mix of emotions, nervousness, curiosity, and a little bit of anger that my brother hadn't talked to me about this. I tried to put those feelings aside and focus on getting to know Dave. We were just hanging out, so maybe it wasn't a date. At least that's what I told myself to console myself. We had a little to drink, and by a little, I mean a lot, and by we, I mean Ty. Dave was so soft and open, and the conversation was smooth. He complimented me in between conversations, which made my heart beat faster. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but it just felt good at that moment. It was getting late, and it had started to rain heavily, so we had to leave. But with my brother gone with my car, Dave offered me a ride. I couldn't turn it down. I could, but I didn't want to. Dave felt so sincere, and he had an attractive aura, so I joined him in his car and we drove off. In the car, Dave told me that Vic informed him about my marriage, and he asked how Mark had been, and I shrugged off the question. I felt weird talking about Mark. Dave was meant to drive me back to my parents' house, but the rain was so heavy. He told me that his place was only about 10 minutes away from the restaurant, and the road was direct and easy, so it would be better to wait out the rain at his side than drive through the flooded roads. Some minutes went by, and the car came to a stop. The house in front of me looked unfamiliar. We were at Dave's place, and he rushed to get down. I got down right after and followed him inside. I really wasn't thinking straight anymore. It was pouring heavily at that time, and we were soaked and cold from both of us trying to get into the car and into the house. He brought towels for me, and he went in to change his clothes. That was when I made a move on him. I know I shouldn't have, and I was drunk, but that's just an excuse I tell myself. I followed him quietly and watched from the door as he took off his shirt. Normally I wouldn't do that, but maybe it was the alcohol and I just wanted my strange sense of excitement. Up until this point in my life, I hadn't even seen another man's body other than Mark. As he took off his shirt, he turned around and saw me at his door, and this made my heart beat faster. The next thing I remember is waking up naked beside him the next morning. I couldn't believe what had happened. Sure, I wasn't the happiest wife, but I never thought things would get to this. I panicked and I grabbed my clothes, thinking about what I had just done. Dave woke up and offered to drop me off, but I declined, and I walked out. As I stood in front of his house, I waited for a cab, but none came, and after a while he drove up to me and offered again. I reluctantly entered his car. The drive was silent. He didn't say much, and neither did I. I just wanted to be back home with Mark, so that Friday I made the long drive home. I was surprised to meet Mark at home, looking ready to head out, and he was just as surprised to see me back home a day early. He was about to head out, but I held his arms, and for the first time since we moved here, I begged my husband to stay home with me. It was then that it hit me. I complained and I'd talked to him about it, but I never for once begged him to stay home with me. He immediately picked his phone and canceled his plans and stayed home. He was worried something might have happened, and of course he was right. But I didn't know how to tell him. One thing that remained constant over the years was that his ideals didn't change, and so I knew that if I told him, I'd end up alone, so I kept it from him. About 2 months passed after that, and I felt sick, and when I went to see the doctor, I was confirmed pregnant. I was terrified. I hoped and prayed it belonged to my husband, but I had my doubts. I told Mark about the pregnancy, and a few days after that, Mark quit his job. He wanted to be able to support me physically and emotionally throughout my pregnancy, and he didn't want to be an absent father. I informed my parents and Vic about it. They told others, of course. We got a few visitors during this period, and suddenly one day, Vic appeared at our place. I knew Vic was aware about what happened between Dave and I, and he made it obvious with the dubious smirk he walked in with. I knew deep down something was about to go horribly wrong, and without hesitation, I pulled Vic in, hugged him, and whispered in his ears, "Don't say a word," before letting go. Vic made himself comfortable and started talking to Mark in a familiar tone as if they've been friends for a very long time. Mark seemed suspicious, but probably thought Vic was finally opening up to him because of the baby coming. I was terrified the whole time, but then Vic stood up and gestured that he was about to leave. I let out a sigh of relief. As they were walking to the door, Vic said I should call Dave, and he had been asking about me. I glared at him, and he randomly asked if I had confirmed who the baby belonged to. My mouth fell open, and I watched Mark's face twist behind Vic when he heard that. Vic just stood there with an evil grin on his face, and Mark walked out and went to the room. I didn't know when tears began pouring from my eyes. I told my brother to leave, and I locked the door behind him. I ran to our room, and I was scared. I knew I had to tell Mark the truth, but I had no idea how he would react. I knew he was devastated, and I didn't want to hurt him even more. As I sat there, trying to figure out what to say, I took a deep breath and finally began to narrate my whole ordeal. He was devastated, and he almost cried. He walked out on me and drove off to God knows where. He didn't come home that night. The next morning, Mark was back home. He told me that he was going to see through the pregnancy, but if the child wasn't his, we were getting a divorce. I was scared. I didn't want to lose him. At the time, it was due in 7 months. It took forever, and even though Mark was supportive throughout that period, he definitely changed a bit. I went into the labor room, and after a few hours, my baby was born, and the DNA test was done immediately, as instructed by Mark. It was a beautiful baby girl, and I cried. The DNA test came back, and as I feared, the baby wasn't his. I told my brother and parents about it, and they were all devastated, except Vic. I got discharged from the hospital and went home with my baby girl. I haven't thought of a name for her yet. My family came over to help me with the baby, and I informed them about the divorce. Mark told me he was going to stay away for some days when he found out the baby wasn't his. I hope he wouldn't go through with the divorce and he would change his mind. Update: I regret what I did, and I wish I could change everything. If only I was a bit patient with Mark, things wouldn't have become like this. Mark came with the divorce papers, and I had no choice but to sign it. He blamed himself for not giving me time, but I said it wasn't his fault. I knew it was all mine. Vic tried cheering me up, saying it was for the better, but I lashed out at him because it was all his fault. We were both raising our voices, and my baby girl started crying. He told me that it wasn't his fault I slept with Dave, and I knew that was true. I told him to get out of the house. My parents had left some days back to go back to their job. They told me to come with them, but I told them later. It was just Vic and I with my baby. Vic said I should at least try to contact Dave to tell him it was his baby. He gave me his number and I said I wouldn't, but I did. I called Dave and his reaction was surprising. He said it wasn't what he planned and he was sorry. He told me the best he could do was provide me child support. I felt like a silly person, and I cried. I named my baby girl Anna after Mark's mom. Mark left me with the house, but I felt so empty. I decided to move back to my parents' house. It would be more helpful if Mom helped take care of Anna considering the situation I was in. Vic came to apologize about what happened because he knew about what Dave said. I still regret everything I did, but I'm grateful for my baby girl, Anna. To everyone reading this, if you feel yourself becoming distant with your husband, speak to him and fix it. Don't try looking for help outside.